Good morning and welcome to the Raben Report. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, so get ready to get triggered. Hello and welcome to the Raben Report. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, and with me is my expert panel, as always, Amara, Samuel, and Jordan. How are you guys?
Good.
Great.
Awesome. We're all in a good mood today. We got a great show for you planned, as always. To begin, all opinions expressed are not those of Ryerson or Ryerson faculty and are only those of the individual commentators. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we get to the news, we'd just like to remind our viewers once again that we are now available everywhere. Did you miss the Raben Report's live show? No problem. Now you can catch up on all past episodes on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Of course, you'll only be able to see our crazy reactions right here on Facebook and the clips on Instagram. But if you're driving to school, doing some homework, now you can listen to us anywhere, anytime. Coming up a little later in the show, we'll be talking about our main topic, the Wet'suwet'en protests. But first, let's take a look at our top stories in our weekly update, starting with Harvey Weinstein finally being charged. What do you guys think of that? He was charged, I believe, in 2 of his 5 counts.
I think he was convicted on 2 of them.
Yes.
He was charged with 5, but yeah.
So this is a huge victory for the Me Too movement and for victims of his sexual misconduct. Assault. I just didn't know which specific things he was charged for, but I know that one of them was sexual assault and the other was harassment, I believe.
I don't know exactly. I think one of them was rape in the 3rd degree, and then I think the other one might have been some sort of forcible sexual conduct. That could have also been sexual assault. It just depends on the wording they used, but It was forcing himself on a woman.
Mm-hmm. And
he walked into the court on a
walker. Yeah, that was nice.
It got more dramatic as the session went on, like just day to day. But then when he was convicted, he walked out perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Aw.
He definitely, like, there's no way in 3 months he just obviously had to get a walker. Like,
I think
it's a show. He's from Hollywood.
I find it so funny that he started walking normally by the end of it. It's like
he just gave it up.
He just gave it up. It's just so far like, you lost. All right, yeah, fuck it. Everything else is done.
Might as well walk to prison.
Yeah.
I think it's like you said, it's a victory for the Me Too movement, and if he sexually assaulted somebody, I think he should be in prison. So I'm not upset about it at all.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I really don't think anybody's upset about it. I think everybody's celebrating the fact that, somebody who did something wrong is getting punished for it, which I think is always the ideal solution. And I think it sets a good precedent for people who do commit these acts, that there is consequence for their action, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what the Me Too movement is about, right? Like, I think people feeling uncomfortable in workplaces and people kind of using their power to coerce people, or just outright forcing someone like he did, and then using their power to coerce them into staying quiet. So that's obviously awful, and I think it's a great victory for that and sets a really good precedent.
Yeah, I think it's just about seeing some sort of like retribution.
Yeah.
I think it's the idea that these claims were brought, they were talked about for a while. I think a lot of people were worried they would just sort of fizzle out of the news cycle, and I think the fact that there was a definitive end to this, and I say that and watch in like 9 months there's going to be an article, Harvey Weinstein released from jail, or something like that. Is he going to jail for that? I'm confused.
Yeah, I think and like the other big one obviously is Bill Cosby, who's in prison, and I think a lot of there's been whispers of sexual harassment or sexual assault stories for decades with various celebrities, and they usually just kind of fade out of the public consciousness. So I'm, like you said, I'm glad that something's actually being done about it, and it's legal.
And we do have a comment coming in from Marshall. He says wording differs state to state and as well as from state to federal court, but sexual assault is generally considered the most acceptable umbrella term.
Yeah.
So while he's making a point that while wording is important, I think we can all agree this is sexual assault.
And we know what people mean. Well, like he said, we know what sexual assault means. It is an umbrella term, but I think everybody understands what they're getting at. So
yeah, Jordan, you wanted to say something?
I did, and I completely blanked on it. So it's
no worries. Well, then let's move on to our next item of business, which is stalling business, the coronavirus. clearly they said that they made a mistake because now we have 2 more confirmed victims, but 2 more confirmed cases in Ontario, and the doctors believe that the incubation period they got wrong. It's now 28 days, and
it's double.
You know, I'm just worried that now, you know, they wait 28 days, and then after that, somebody's going to come out and be like, I have coronavirus, and be like, you know what, the incubation's 3 months. Sorry,
I do think that, I mean, yeah, that's, you know, like alarming, but I still think that I just think in general we should keep a cool head, because genuinely, what are you going to do, you know? Mm-hmm. Like the same thing with the swine flu. I remember that and being like terrified of it, and it's like, all you can really do is wash your hands, and you can choose to stay home if you don't want to go out, if you don't have to, like that's up to you. But I think, yeah. And seeing world governments, though, like national governments, kind of fumble it is a little bit scary.
I mean, the market dropped after on Monday and Tuesday. It just started to go down, and I believe I don't know if it's the Dow or the TSX, but they lost
I think it was the Dow.
All yearly gains.
Yeah, all yearly gains lost just in the past 2 days.
I think that has a lot to do also with Trump's like the weird way he's handling it and talking about it.
That was before. The 8% drop was last week, and his press conference was yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they've been talking about him. Like, he hasn't been really taking it seriously for a long time, not just the press conference.
Yeah.
Just the way in which he's been handling it.
Conference. Yeah, well, there is something you can do. Like the Canada's Minister for Health said you should stockpile food and medication, which is always a good idea. You should always have stocked food and supplies, medical supplies, extra months worth of necessary or required medication.
Here's my thing with that. I agree that that's a very good point. I'm just worried that the wording of that is just going to cause public panic. Like, I agree. You should always have food piled up, and you should have medication piled up. But if I see an article saying you need to stockpile food, you need to stockpile medicine, I don't know about you. If I'm uninformed on the issue, I think national emergency.
But what does that mean? Because everyone's saying everybody should kind of have an emergency plan, but you can only control yourself. And I think the fear is some sort of like civil unrest because people are afraid of dying.
Yeah. Well, you can follow, if you're following what's happening in northern Italy, there's a military quarantine, and there's videos I've seen of people going into grocery stores and, you know, there's like the shelves are just completely empty.
Right.
People are shocked, like, oh, I didn't think it was going to happen so quickly. So,
and that's terrifying. Like just the idea of a grocery store being completely empty.
And it's a military enforced quarantine. Like
really,
you can go to jail for 3 months if you disobey the quarantine in these specific villages in northern Italy.
But I think also Canada is probably better off than Italy is in terms of just handling it like administratively.
Well, we'll see.
Well, just to continue on Italy, we have a comment coming in from Raleigh that says the authorities have handled this poorly, especially in Italy. And Zahavi says Israel is developing a vaccine that they expect to be ready within the next 3 weeks. So Italy is obviously, with the military enforcement, it adds to what Jordan was saying about the hysteria, right?
Yeah, and I think also with vaccines, it takes a long time for them to be available to the public. So they can be developed and tested on people who are willing to be tested on, but it still takes a pretty long time for like just regular people to be able to get it. So, I mean, it's scary. It all is.
I also worry whenever there's a new vaccine made that they're going to patent it and make it super, super
I was going to say,
expensive.
are you an anti-vaxxer? Are you
No.
worried that...
Could you imagine? I mean, like, I'm upset
autism?
that there's vaccines being made for this disease. I think, no, but I feel like it's a way, especially in the way that I think poor people necessarily not are at risk more of disease. I think that's a weird thing to say, but I mean, sort of that the fact that like this is especially like people say their way to avoid it is like avoid public transportation, avoid stuff like that. Stuff that not necessarily always is, but does sometimes lead to some sort of socioeconomic barrier.
Even stockpiling food, you'd
Exactly. You have to have the money to stockpile food. Someone on food stamps can't probably afford to stockpile food. And I'm worried, while a vaccine is great, I'm more worried it's going to be in the hands of the wrong people. And we're going to see a vaccine that's only available to people who probably don't really need it.
You ever played the original Deus Ex?
I have not.
Okay. That is exactly the plot to that game. There's like a government-made artificial pandemic, and they let it spread, and then they selectively distribute the vaccines.
In Canada, we'll probably be okay. Like, we probably won't have to pay for it. So
we probably won't need it.
To be glad
still
for
completely honest.
healthcare here.
I'm still pretty on the side that it's not as big of a deal as the news cycles make.
How many people in Canada in total have it?
And how many?
It was 5.
And how many of those are serious cases?
Yes.
I believe it was 10, and then 2 had since recovered. The first 2
Yeah,
cases
I've also read that there are some cases where like the symptoms are mild enough that hospitalization is not necessary.
And I feel like
self-isolate.
Yeah, so that's obviously like reassuring to hear that if hospitals are scary. So if you don't need to be in a hospital, that means they don't think you're going to die. So if you can just recover at home, that's pretty.
I also feel like wording is
reassuring.
especially important in this. Like, because the symptoms are so similar to symptoms of the flu in mild situations, and it's the middle of winter in
Yes.
Canada,
Yes.
and we have people who probably go to the doctors who are a bit of hypochondriacs and are going like, I have all these symptoms, I looked it up online, I have the coronavirus, and I'm sure a doctor, and that's it, because there's not a ton known about it, could only say, well, it's possible you might have it, although we can't confirm it, which could be counted as not a confirmed case necessarily, but it adds to the hysteria going around. I know that there is a lot of people being like, well, we're so scared of it. I don't think it's that serious.
Yeah, and I think like the symptoms are pretty similar to the flu. So like if you have a cough or a sore throat, go to the doctor. Like you should definitely go to the doctor considering what's happening. But I just don't think that hysteria is the best thing to do or best way to go about.
You should be prepared.
Yeah, not hysterical.
Yeah.
Well, let's actually continue on the topic of hysteria and move on to our next subject, which is the Democratic debate in South Carolina. There's clearly a lot of hysteria and conflict within the Democratic Party. Who's the best person to lead the ticket
Bernie
to
Sanders.
beat Donald Trump in the next election? And Amara, we obviously know that you're pro Bernie Sanders, but let's talk about the actual debate itself that occurred in South Carolina. We talked about a debate last week. It feels like at this point it's a weekly thing.
And
they're
it
gonna
goes
get
on until November.
Yeah, it's going to get as consistent as the Raben Report, which we don't know. So
Their election cycle is way too long. That's all I was saying. It's
100%, yeah.
exhausting. But
Can't believe it's still the primaries.
I know.
I feel like they've been going on forever.
And it's barely like started.
So what's everyone's take? I know Sam, you watched it. You guys watched the highlights. Jordan and Amara. No, that's fair. It's a long debate, 2 hours of them. It's hard to get through, but
You can only handle so much
yeah,
Buttigieg.
Yeah, I was going to say some of them are hard to get through 2 hours of not all of them.
I had popcorn and a beer. I was having a great time.
And what's your takeaway from it?
Well, it was very obvious that everyone was piling on Sanders as he's the front runner. But I really was surprised. I think Bloomberg had a much better showing than the first time. In the first debate with Bloomberg, what's her name? Warren just like dogpiled him. Like he was and his poll numbers showed he was treading actually quite close to Bernie nationally. And then after the debate, it jumped down. But I think he did a pretty good job. And he's very he had some hit and misses with bad jokes. I can't recall them exactly, but they were just terrible.
Right.
But he just like flat out admitted that he bought congressmen and congresswomen, like a little Freudian slip. I just thought it was hilarious.
Well, Amara, just to challenge you by one of the comments we're getting, Zahavi says that he thinks Pete was the best. He was the most assertive and level-headed and had good one-liners. Amara, what is your response?
I don't think good one-liners are something that we should look for in a president. I think we should look for good policies and good governance.
And you believe Bernie has the best policies out of everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Jordan, what's your take on the debate? Who was your favorite candidate?
I'm with Amara. I'm a bit of a Bernie bro myself. I'd also responding to the comment if I can. I think it's easy to be level-headed in a debate amongst Democrats. I don't think that because while they're differing in opinions, at least, like when you're along party lines, there's still enough similarity and overlap that's a little easier. You're not going against someone with complete opposite opinions of you. At least that's what I find. And I think being assertive, like, yes, that's good, but it's also the same qualities that people like yelled at Hillary for having. It's inherent sexism in that, but we're not going to get into that because I could argue that for a while. But yeah, I'm Team Bernie and I am not Team Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah, me neither. I don't like Pete Buttigieg very much.
And let's look at Joe Biden, Amy Klobuchar, Tom Sawyer. What's his name?
Sayer.
Sayer.
Sawyer.
I don't even see. Like he's clearly not very relevant because I don't even know his name properly. Tom. So you said it was
Sayer?
Sayer. Yeah. Tom Sayer. What's he saying?
I don't know.
He's like the climate change candidate. Like that's his whole focus. It's climate change, justice, and now that ties to everything. Yeah, that's all I know about him.
Well, coming back to you, Amara, Zahavi's back. In the context of a debate, one-liners are important. Bernie crapped the bed when he was called out for supporting Castro. That's actually a good point he made about Bernie supporting Castro.
He didn't. He supported his literacy program. He didn't support a dictatorship.
What if Zahavi can comment again more? Why are one-liners important in the context of a debate? I'm not following
because
that
people
logic.
are going to like tweet about them, and it's going to get attention.
Because most voters are fickle and
Yes.
stupid, and that's all they'll pay attention to. They'll pay attention to headlines and stuff like that. And even the thing about supporting Castro, like I'm not a Bernie supporter by any means, but I think it's really disingenuous to say that
He
just
supported
because he supports
Castro.
one policy doesn't mean
Oh, look
like
at that. We're all coming together.
It's like the whole like conservative Inc. Their whole running, I guess, motto, especially during the campaign, is going to be
socialism.
socialist,
Yeah.
communist.
I agree with that. And I think it's disingenuous.
And I know Marshall, if he's still in here, has discussed this before. Wouldn't a better approach for conservatives be, why are young people in any age demographic being more interested in socialism or left-wing economic
because
policies?
they're poor.
Exactly. What are the conditions economically,
Because
socially,
we feel
whatever?
like we have no hope for an economic future.
Yeah, probably you're right. Why are people getting disenfranchised? So that's a better question. And then like,
Neoliberalism and globalization.
just saying communism, that's what does that appeal to 20% of people between the ages of 50 and 80? Like, it's so tired.
I also think there's a lot of moderates, right? People calling themselves moderates democratically, and I think they're going to split that moderate Democratic vote. So I think that's good for Bernie as well. Yeah, I don't think Bernie's crapping the bed. He did pretty well in Nevada, so I think he's doing pretty okay.
Hendrik comes in, says, bad comment, Zahavi, not a single one-liner. Okay, so he doesn't even believe that Pete Buttigieg has some one-liners. But
No,
that's,
I think he was saying
said-
he didn't he didn't use any
Zahavi's
one-liners.
comments was bad because there
They
were
didn't
no
include any.
one-liners.
got it. Okay.
Might even say he crapped the bed.
Marshall, I check out your Twitter feed. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
We're just having conversation with people in the
Well,
comments.
listen, we're very thankful to our viewers for commenting because we appreciate their points of view and it adds to the discussion. But now let's move on to our main topic, which is the Wet'suwet'en blockades. According to CTV News, on December 31st, 2019, the BC Supreme Court granted Coastal GasLink an expanded injunction against the Wet'suwet'en Nation members blocking access to the project. The Coastal GasLink pipeline is a $6.6 billion, 670-kilometer pipeline that would carry natural gas across northern BC. Now, GasLink says the route was approved based on discussions with, I quote, Indigenous, landowner, and stakeholder input, the environment, archaeological, and cultural values, land use compatibility, safety, constructability, and economics, end quote. They also said they signed agreements with the elected council of all 20 First Nations along the route, including the Wet'suwet'en. But according to leaders in the Wet'suwet'en, sorry, I just hit puberty apparently. But according to leaders in the Wet'suwet'en Nation, they never surrendered its Aboriginal title, otherwise known as its inherent right to the land. This conflict has caused solidarity protests across the country, with protesters blocking access to rail lines, legislatures, and port entries. Trains have been canceled, goods aren't able to be delivered, and the economy is at stake. On today's episode, our panel examines the facts and the fiction surrounding the issue. We'll talk about the pipeline project itself, the government's response, as well as the economic impact of these blockades. As a reminder, we are live on Facebook, so continue to comment on our show to have your thoughts read live on air. We're going to start with our poll. We asked our audience, are you for or against the pipeline protest? And Sam, what were the results?
So on Facebook, we had 44 votes. 23 said yes. 21 said no in support of the protests. 52% said yes. 48% no. And on Instagram, we had 14 votes. 13 people said no. One person said yes. So that's 93 to
And
7.
yeah, that one person was Amara.
I
Yeah.
I thought that this would stay anonymous. Honestly,
Jeez.
Well, everybody can see, but
feel a little exposed.
no,
they can
that's-
see
that's
who
a-
voted for what.
well, we can see who voted.
Yeah, I didn't know you would tell everyone.
Well,
That's
it's
what I'm
okay.
saying.
I mean, you're obviously going to say your view on the show anyway, but it's just quite interesting to see the dynamics again. So, because last time we were talking about voting on Instagram, and you mentioned that it's a lot more left wing on Instagram and more conservative on Facebook. It's quite interesting that it's even more against the pipeline this time on Instagram than it is on Facebook. But before we get to your responses, let me ask the question to you guys. Let me open it up. Are you for or against the pipeline, Amara?
The pipeline,
Or sorry, the protests.
the protest. I would say I'm for it. Like, there's nuance to that opinion, but I support them, the protesters.
Okay, Samuel.
No.
No, you're against it, and Jordan.
I support the protesters.
You support the protesters. Okay, now let's get into why, Amara.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of political conflict, like within the Wet'suwet'en Nation, between the hereditary and elected chiefs, and I think even within those two groups as well. They're obviously not a monolith, but they have like a political system that should be adhered to. But I think the main issue is that the land is not ceded, and I think that's what is going to start causing a lot of problems as development continues. Because if it's unceded land, then, I mean, obviously the government can do what they want by force, but if they're trying to be, legally sound according to the Constitution, then it's not theirs.
And do you mind expanding on the difference between the hereditary chiefs and the you said the
Elected chiefs.
Elected
So as
chiefs.
far as I know, I did take an Indigenous governance course, but I could be wrong. Just want to say that.
Yeah.
The hereditary chiefs are what the tribe had themselves, like inherently, and it's not hereditary in the way we would think of like a monarchy. It's more where like the chief picks their successor. And their successor would have to be approved by others and stuff like that. And then the elected chiefs were put in place by the Indian Act. So obviously they're elected. So that's why there are two different governance systems.
Okay, and Samuel, what's your response to that?
To
Amara's
the
comment.
structure of the native groups.
No, to her previous comments
Oh,
about
okay.
why she's for the protests.
Sure. Well, there's just a little bit of context. The natural gas pipeline that, if no one has
the
researched
Coastal GasLink.
it, it would ship natural gas to China, in East Asia, whatever. The pipeline, the proposed route of it, was going to go through 20 Native American areas, 20 different tribes.
Yeah.
And the 19 of the 20 approved of it, elected and hereditary. I don't know if that structure's
It might not
similar
be
for every
one.
single tribe, but more or less they agreed to it. There was a majority agreement. And then one of the tribes, the
Wet'suwet'en.
Wetu, whatever, the elected ones said yes, they approved of it. A majority of the hereditary chiefs said yes. It is a minority, I believe it's 5 out of 8, that said they didn't agree to the pipeline and the proposal. So, Canadian rail infrastructure, which is crucial to national security, economic security, is being held hostage in more or less by a percentage of a minority of one tribe involved in a pipeline. It just seems ridiculous to me. And I had the definition of domestic terrorism here. It's a political or religious, theological purpose. Sorry, I'm reading that wrong. Defines terrorism an act committed in whole or part for a political whatever, with regard to its security, including its economic security, or compelling a person, a government, or domestic or international organization to refrain from doing any act.
So
That's Justice Canada. It's not some...
Are you calling what the protests are domestic terrorism?
I think initially when they were protesting, there was some in Queen's Park. I wouldn't call that domestic terrorism. It's not disrupting national security or essential services. But I've seen plenty of videos of like fires being lit on and near the tracks. Premier Legault from Quebec said people were brandishing firearms in or around the protests or tangentially.
I've heard
to
of people also like purposely derailing trains, like putting things on the track.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
there's
trains are
video of
derailed.
that.
Yeah, so that is, I would definitely describe that as domestic terrorism. Absolutely.
Amara?
I think most effective protests would be described as domestic terrorism.
Are you effective? Does it give it the moral right to exist? Should the state intervene, even if it is
Well,
protest?
I mean, I think some of the things that happened during the civil rights movement would have been considered domestic terrorism. I feel like that's I mean, you can argue with the definition, but I don't think that that necessarily means that they're wrong. You know, states are not always morally right. They could be doing something wrong, like apartheid in South Africa, or like what the Civil Rights Act, you know, Jim Crow laws in the States during the Civil Rights Movement. Those were very immoral. And I think domestic terrorism, if that's what we're going to call it, was absolutely justified in those situations. But I don't think, so things like firearms and setting fires and derailing trains, I absolutely don't support. I don't think I don't think it's that intense in this situation. But like I was saying, I do think that most effective protests would be considered domestic terrorism, and I support their right to protest and what they're protesting for.
So Zahavi's back, and he says that they're breaking the law. What's your take on that?
Like I said, most effective protests are breaking some sort of law. And during the Civil Rights Movement, it was illegal for Black people to drink from certain water fountains. I mean, you could argue that they were breaking the law by doing so, but I'm not going to think that they're wrong for that. So
I think that you can only hold that position with foresight, and the fact that they're breaking the law just because there was a moral. They had a moral right in the past to break the law, sure, but I don't think that can be used in this case.
Well, I don't think breaking the law can be used. That's what I'm saying. I don't think
that's why
breaking
the
the law
exists,
is a good argument.
It defines what's wrong and what's right in a society.
Yeah,
right?
Racism is wrong, and I think
This isn't
building on
racism.
unceded land is pretty wrong. And I think if you're going to argue that the treatment of Indigenous people in
Right.
Canada isn't historically racist, let's get a
Well,
whole
we're talking
thing.
about this case in particular. In this case in particular, if you want to talk about Indigenous sovereignty, if we want to, that's the axiom we're going to use. A majority of the tribes agree to it, and even within this Wet'suwet'en,
Yep.
oh, I actually said it right.
Wet'suwet'en, yeah.
Wet'suwet'en tribe, majority of the elected and hereditary chiefs agree to it. So if we want to talk about respecting Indigenous sovereignty, I think we're just...
Well, sovereignty doesn't, like, the Wet'suwet'en people are, well, not all of them, I understand, but those who are protesting there are obviously exercising their own sovereignty in terms of protesting.
Well,
So I think that's
in
what
a
they're
way,
doing.
wouldn't you say they're delegitimizing their, not their sovereignty, but the way their pseudo-state operates?
Yes, I do.
Why would the Canadian government give any credence to a decision passed by the Wet'suwet'ens or any tribe in the future if a very, very vocal and violent minority
yeah.
can disrupt the whole process?
I think that there obviously needs to be like a complete overhaul of the way that the Canadian government interacts with the Indigenous peoples in Canada. They're not a monolith. They don't all have the same governance systems. They're all very different. It's very political. So yeah, I would say that it undermines it, but I don't think it's a good system to begin with.
Now, would you say that what the government wants to do, the fact that they have arrested people on the actual land, do you believe that what they're fighting for is against a violation of human rights?
I think arresting people like on the land in BC would be a violation of human rights, but I don't think arresting people in like Ontario that are blocking the go at Guildwood is a violation of human rights.
No, and I'd like to mention, we talked about it briefly before the show, a lot of the people that are involved in these blockades and the violent ones aren't even Indigenous people. They're maybe some of the viewers have heard of the white savior complex. These people that just believe they have the need to just insert themselves in issues that really don't involve them and think they can come to the savior or come to the rescue of these downtrodden minorities. I think it's really ridiculous.
I think the white savior complex definitely exists. And I do think that some of this is probably some of that. And there's obviously just like generally anti-pipeline environmentalists, I'm sure, piggybacking on it. But
yeah, I saw Extinction Rebellion. They had their sign or whatever. One of the protests, I believe it was in Quebec.
I think that they're solidarity protests. So I don't think we would assume that they're all like Wet'suwet'en people because they're obviously not.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about briefly, the whole, obviously the backdrop to this is environmental policy. As we all know, as we've discussed, China and East Asia, Southeast Asia is the world's biggest polluter, and that is partially due to their consumption of coal.
And this would make them consume less coal.
Natural gas. It's natural gas. It's cleaner. It has less emissions. I mean, if you really wanted to have a macro global scale, wouldn't you support this initiative?
I think that's a good point because
In
I
theory.
definitely, I support the like Canadian is all I can really talk about. Support Canada shifting to renewable energy sources in general, but I do think that China and India obviously pollute a lot, and I think there's a good case to be made for the fact that they're burning coal, and that's way worse for the environment than natural gas.
I feel like it's such an old news story about them trying to build a pipeline on land that's not theirs, and then they finally get it done, and then it leaks and it destroys the land. And I feel like that's exactly what is going to go happen. So yes, it might lower China's carbon footprint for like a hot second, but I think it could arguably have worse ecological impacts on the actual land here in Canada, which if I had to pick one to care more about, that's what I'd care about.
But what's better, a pipeline or by ship? Or because ships have trains, they have derailed.
think
Ships have
neither.
If we're talking about possibly like harming Indigenous land, which is obviously what this is all like, not all about. There's the solidarity protests, but beginning in BC, that's what this is about. And they obviously have a different relationship to their actual physical land than we do. So I think that should be something to be considered if it's possible that it's just going to be destroyed.
I also think it's more so the principle of the thing, more so than anything else. Like, yes, there's not a majority who necessarily agrees with it within the population, but if the government of Canada says that we have this treaty with you guys, that basically means that your land has what you guys want to do with it, and it's fully up to you guys, and we won't intervene. But then the moment that they want to build something like that, they automatically just choose to immediately go back on it. Like,
Well, that's the thing. There's no treaty at all.
there's nothing, but there's an agreement.
I think there's sort of an agreement.
Well, it's unceded land, so wasn't there expressly no agreement?
Yeah, but I think the way that Canada's like modernly kind of, functioned in relation to Indigenous people, it's kind of an understanding that they have some sort of sovereignty over their land.
But then the moment that it's inconvenient for the government of Canada to let them have that sovereignty, they take it away, essentially.
Well,
I think we can, also talk about Justin Trudeau's, you're going to talk about this, I know, but
that's where
I'll
I was
just wait,
going
I
next.
guess.
Well, I'll get back to you. But you mentioned a good point, the response of the government, and that's where we're going to move to next. What has been the government's response, and do you support it?
Not much. I don't think Justin Trudeau's really done much about it. And I think he in general is he's just not great. I mean, if we can talk about the climate strike again, he was at the climate strike.
Yeah.
He's the government, so he was literally effectively striking against himself. Like, he should have gone to work maybe and then not bought the pipeline if he supported the climate strike movement. So
yeah, because he called for a quick resolution to the situation, but he is part of that resolution, so shouldn't
he's also part of the problem.
I feel like this is my ever-standing opinion on anything Justin Trudeau does. He's the perfect face, but he has just not a lot going on behind it.
He's just so I don't know. He just feels
He's very good at appearing to look what's right, but then the moment you put a little more thought behind it and be like, wait a second, you realize that it's a complete show. There's no substance behind it, I find.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think he's in a hard spot because he can either, enforce the law and then lose a lot of his left-wing supporters, or he could do nothing and then he's not going to gain back people that oppose the pipeline. I mean, that support the pipeline. He wouldn't gain those people back by, acting. So, yeah, it's just a weak. What do you expect? It's like a weak, no spine.
Yeah. Well, Zahavi's back. Thank you so much. Truly, thank you, Zahavi, for commenting. We really appreciate it. He says his hands are tied by his own doing for trying to appease the oil and gas industry and the climate activists. So that goes back to exactly what you said, Samuel, that if he does one thing, he loses support, and then if he does the other, he doesn't really gain support. It's just stalled.
He's going to have to show his cards.
His press conference he did last week with all his weak-looking ministers behind him, he basically shifted blame or the responsibility towards the provincial governments in dealing with it, more or less. He said the federal government has no involvement, okay, and then he said it's up to premiers to enforce their laws. But the federal government should put forth a national, especially in times of crisis, which this is, a national unity or national, spirit that unifies the country in a singular purpose.
But what would that be? How would you unify the country if people are so split up?
And I think that could be dangerous because I don't think that we want to unify the country against Indigenous people.
No, not against Indigenous people.
No, and I don't think that's what you're saying. No. I think that's what it could be perceived as by certain people. And I think same kind of thing with like the coronavirus. People who are going to be like racist in situations like these probably aren't going to take the time to try to figure out if they're being racist to the right people. So I think he's in a really hard spot. He's also not that great, so I think he's not going to do that well. I think Harper would have done better.
When Pierre Trudeau said, "Just watch me," and he declared the War Measures Act in Quebec under the FLQ crisis, I don't think he worried about the sympathies of far right communist separatists, right? I mean, no matter what.
What are you talking about?
The FLQ crisis.
Who are the far right communist separatists you're talking about?
The FLQ.
Oh, not in relation.
I think he's giving an
how is that
example.
going-
Of
no,
like,
I understand the
Yeah,
example.
well,
How
say-
is that going to
yeah.
relate
Yes.
to
Well,
this?
if I can
Because-
respond to that
because
example, actually.
One at a time,
Because
Samuel, and then
Pierre
we're going to go
Trudeau-
to Jordan.
When he used his office and his authority in a
People
time
are
of...
also dying.
Yes,
So-
I know. One person died. In a time of national crisis, he disregarded the minority fringes that might disagree with them in the cause of national unity and national action. And I don't see that here. And he should learn something from his father. Maybe only that, because the rest of it's pretty bad.
Jordan?
Yeah, that's what I'd argue is that he's not his dad. And that's one of the whole points is that he's trying to be every side's best friend. And when you were holding such a high position of office, that is only going to backfire on you. There's
Exactly.
not a way that someone doesn't
make
end
everyone
up
happy.
upset, and that upset is always going to be directed at him. I think at this point, he just needs to, pick a side. Like,
Yeah, do something.
show, I did just watch Hamilton this weekend, so Aaron Burr is on my mind, but show your political hand a bit. Like, don't be afraid to keep everything so close to your chest and support everyone. Let them know who you're supporting, because that will affect a lot of the public opinion as well.
So who do you think the government should support? What do you think the government should do? What should their response be?
I think their response, honestly, they shouldn't build the pipeline. If they should build it somewhere else. Like, I don't know where necessarily.
Why shouldn't they build the pipeline?
Because in respect,
Build a pipeline there.
like they can
Yeah.
still build a pipeline if they want, but then do it on.
But the
land.
majority agreed to it.
The majority agree to it, but not everyone. The majority is
That's not
not
how-
how. If it clearly, if it was already a decided issue amongst the Wet'suwet'en clan, there wouldn't be these protests going on.
Yeah, because there's always, no matter what political decision, any decision in life, there's always a minority that opposes it. It doesn't give them, we don't give any group that's, no matter how small, the credence to disrupt our
Clearly, by
politics.
the support across Canada, I'd argue it's not that small
Well,
of a minority. A
couple
group.
hundred people, it's a country of 33
As
million.
we've said, it's enough to stop enough of the railroads, it's enough of the trains, enough to cause an actual. Here's the thing: if it wasn't that big of a deal, we wouldn't be talking about it here.
Oh,
and
that
that's
is-
the.
Boom.
What?
I hate that justification so much.
Well, it's a real justification.
people
if it
can-
wasn't news, if it wasn't on people's radar, we wouldn't be talking
Wait,
about
can
it.
I just ask?
Yeah.
Are you saying that you don't think domestic terrorism is a big deal because
it is
you
a big deal.
compared that
Exactly.
to this? So why are you annoyed
I-
that Jordan said it's a big deal?
It is a big deal. I'm talking about when a small group,
Oh, okay.
just because there's a minority of a political group that makes a decision, we shouldn't give that much credence to that small group and ignore the larger
In a democratic
in a-
nation.
supposedly.
I think that in terms of this situation, I think the government should definitely, like the setting fires and stuff, like I mentioned before, the violent things need to stop. But I think this just makes it clear that the government needs to really overhaul how they deal with Indigenous people in Canada. And it's very difficult because they've thrown money at the problem for a lot of time, and that hasn't helped, obviously. And then there's obviously the issue of sovereignty. So Indigenous people don't necessarily want the Canadian government going in and making decisions for them. So I think there needs to be, I don't know, maybe another royal commission, but a real effort in changing the way that the Indigenous community is not necessarily is treated, but also dealt with by the government, because it's obviously not working, and it hasn't been working. It hasn't ever worked.
So what do
agreed-
you think? Sorry,
Yeah.
what do you think the response of the government should be then
To like this specific
to
incident,
this whole issue? Yeah.
I think that they should probably go ahead with the pipeline, and I only just say that because the majority of the Wet'suwet'en people and the other tribes agreed to it. And I do think if we're going off of democracy, that's what should happen. But I don't think, again, it's clear that it's not working, and the system that they're trying to use in order to make these decisions isn't working. So there needs to be some change.
I'd argue that while some people are in favor of the pipeline, I'd also argue that it's more so about what this whole issue represents. Like you said,
Yes.
it's about more than this pipeline. It's not like once this pipeline is resolved, it's solved one way or another. This is more so a face of a lot of deeper issues.
I agree, but I think the blockades definitely are going to have to end at some point.
The way I look at it is like fires and stuff, bad. Don't do that. But the blockades are an effective protest that is causing an actual, not sort of response from the government, but causing a need for a response from the government. It's very easy to ask for like peaceful protests, stuff like that, which I think protests should be peaceful.
Would
for
you
the most of-
support a bridge being blown up
I
if
would.
no one gets hurt?
Is it bad that my first thought is which bridge?
It is bad.
Probably not, if I'm being
the
honest.
context
That's
matters.
interesting.
The context
That's interesting.
matters as well,
Yeah.
though. Like, there are plenty of examples of
There are plenty of small bridges that wouldn't be that.
no, that's not what I was going to say. There are plenty of examples of protests in other situations that have been maybe violent or not as peaceful as going to Queen's Park and yelling on the lawn, but I think that
it's more effective
they're
this way.
effective.
I
And it
think
depends what you're protesting against.
if they just went to a park and yelled with signs, you know what I think would have happened? I think the pipeline would be built already. I think nothing else would have happened. I argue that because you need to have some bit of forcefulness to an extent, to a reasonable extent, which I think is a very important asterisk to put there, to show that there is some there's some bite behind your bark, essentially, that you're not all talk. Because it's been proven in the past that a lot of peaceful protests will tend to fail for the most part.
This is interesting. I'm reminded of the dichotomy between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. I mean, wasn't his brand of revolution in the end more successful? I don't care about either.
I'd argue one needed the other to succeed in a way.
Yeah, not necessarily. I think, I mean, if you obviously know about their differences, and I don't think Malcolm X was necessarily wrong in the way that, or somebody on his side, like the Black Panther Party, I don't think they were, I mean, at the end, things kind of fell off. But I think in general, like arming themselves and considering what was going on with
that was legal when they were arming themselves.
No, that's not, but
this is illegal.
That was part of what caused people not to like them.
Even
people
Malcolm
to be
X, to
afraid
my
of them.
knowledge, wasn't violent in the sense that
he wasn't he
supported
Martin Luther
criminal
King
action.
was like a pacifist.
Yes.
And Malcolm X was not. Martin Luther King would have said like turn the other cheek, and Malcolm X would have said like go get your gun if they're aggressing against you. So I don't think either of them is necessarily right. I don't think you can. I mean, this is off topic, but I don't think you can look at somebody.
I just thought it
living in like
similar.
Pre-Civil Rights Act America, like a black person living in pre-Civil Rights Act America, and tell them that they should be non-violent and peaceful in their protest because horrible things were happening to them. So,
A very shallow analogy, but I thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, well, I mean, then it's really hard to understand what the government should do then, because
hard being prime minister.
I'll tell you what they should do.
Hard decisions.
The problem has been ignored and put aside because it's politically expedient to do so, because it's a sensitive topic, and regardless of political stripe, I think that people on either side have differing opinions, conservative, liberal, whatever. So, in my personal opinion, they should either be given a higher degree of sovereignty over their land, whatever, much in the way the U.S. does, where they're semi-autonomous. But then that would give them a clear distinction of where their borders are, where their land is, and the responsibilities associated with that. And then the level of government assistance, special privileges they get as a racial group decrease over time if that's more convenient. You either do that, that's one possible solution, and the other is just fully integrate them as a community. Okay, then I honestly don't see another solution, because they're not monolithic, as you said, Amara. There's multiple, I'm sure hundreds, maybe even thousands of tribes across Canada.
Probably thousands.
A singular political solution is that would appease all of them is, I think, unrealistic. So either give them more sovereignty with less strings attached, or just say, well, just come join Canada. It's 21st century.
Well, what's interesting to me, and I wanna understand your point of view, Amara and Jordan. Amara, specifically, you said that you think the pipeline should be built, but you're also supporting the protest. So how do you substantiate both sides of the argument? Because if the pipeline is built, I feel like the protests are going to continue. But if it's not built, then obviously you're not for it not being built. You're for it being built.
I'm not. If it's not built, I'm not going to be sad. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it not being built. But what I'm saying is that I support the protests because I think they're bringing, like Jordan said, I think this is a bigger issue. It's not just this specific pipeline. And like Samuel mentioned, there needs to be some sort of overhaul of the political system and the way that Indigenous people are dealt with in Canada, because it's clearly not working. So that's why I support the protests, because I think that, like Samuel said, it's been ignored. The issue of dealing with Indigenous people and their governance and the problems that they're facing have been ignored, and it's eventually going to come to a head. If the pipeline gets built and this all dies down, something else is going to happen. And I think the government needs to deal with it.
So then let's talk about the economic impact of this, because that relates to both the protests themselves and the government's response. Has this protest created an economic disaster?
No.
Yeah, to my knowledge, there's hundreds of millions of dollars worth of produce that are on hold
Yeah.
every single day.
$425 million worth of goods sit on trains daily.
Sure. And then in the, it's wintertime, in the eastern part of Canada, eastern townships of Quebec and the maritime provinces, they heat a lot of their infrastructure with propane, which is by and large delivered by freight train. And I remember reading an article last week, I'm sure it's probably even worse now, the Quebec government was rationing the use of propane, and this propane was being used in nursing homes, hospitals, rural homes that desperately need it. So yeah, I think to ignore it and say, oh, it's just an inconvenience, like you're not going to get your cheap Chinese plastic shit. Like, no, it's not that. It's critical infrastructure. Canada, by and large, became a country because of its the Confederation was the rail line, the connection between interprovincial trade is necessary for Confederation. Mm-hmm. It's a big country. It's a huge landmass, small population. We need the rails. Yeah, it is crucial. Absolutely.
Jordan, you said you don't think it's an economic disaster. What's your response to Samuel?
Well, I do think it's definitely causing some sort of impact on the economy. I think disaster is a term that's being thrown around a little too lightly. Like, yes, produce is sitting. I don't know if any of you guys have been to a grocery store in Canada recently. Like, you wouldn't notice anything's wrong by what's not there. I think
maybe not in Ontario, but in Newfoundland, for example, or sorry, New Brunswick. There are
Earl. I think you're really just having a very local. I mean, you can say Southern Ontario is also very close to the U.S. border.
Yeah,
I'm talking about the eastern townships of Quebec, very rural, very cold, and the maritime provinces.
All that seems to me, it's a protest that's being effective. I think. Sorry, I know it's not necessarily the answer that you want, but I agree.
No, is very heartless, and I think there's probably thousands of people.
I'd argue Canada has been more heartless to their Indigenous people than they are currently being.
But how long are you going to?
There's always going to be Indigenous.
How long are you going to hold the past against the present?
As long as it's still continuing, then yes. How long are we going to hold? I mean, clearly it's not the past; it's happening right now.
That's what the debate's about. Because you mentioned that in the past, the Canadian government has treated First Nations people horribly.
Yes, up until currently.
But now you're saying that it's okay that there's people that are, that stores have products missing, and it's okay because they're protesting.
He's not saying it's okay, as in it's like favorable. Yeah. He's saying it's effective, and I think
this is a way to get a message across.
That's a giant cop out to ignore a moral decision about it. Because everyone, even people that are against it, are saying it's effective. I'm saying it's effective, but I think what Elliot's asking is if you support it.
Yeah, well, because Cassidy comes in and says, she's quoting you, it doesn't impact my direct local area.
I would say that's a quote.
Well,
I did not.
She's paraphrasing you.
Yes.
It doesn't impact my direct local area, and therefore the impact doesn't exist or is negligible.
I'm not saying it's negligible, but I'm hearing yes, they're missing some products in stores. No one is starving in Canada right now. People are starving in Canada, but not necessarily because of this actual products. I think it's definitely causing maybe not as much selection as people would like in those areas, but I know there's empty.
I think it's difficult because I definitely heating nursing homes, it's obviously very important.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think that a financial crisis could happen if it keeps going, obviously.
But as of now,
all of those goods, yes. I would say as of now, it's not a financial crisis, but that's definitely possible. And I don't think we need to make people in other parts of Canada hate us even more in Southern Ontario by saying we don't deal with it here, but it happens there, and that's why it's not necessarily
it's a very elitist and
on our radar. Yeah, people don't like Toronto already. We don't have to make them not like us anymore. But with your question,
let them eat cake, right?
She never said that.
It is very close. The peasants can't have bread. Why don't they just eat cake? My grocery store
Marie
prices
Antoinette
haven't
did not
changed.
say that. It's myth.
Yeah, well,
she was like 15, so you should give her a break. But all I was going to say was I think that it's very difficult to separate the horrible history of colonialism in relation to Indigenous peoples and what they're doing right now, because the community has been absolutely decimated by the Canadian government.
Well, let's talk about, let's continue on the subject of economic disaster, whether it is or it isn't. Early this week, Teck Resources Limited, a U.S. company, announced that it was withdrawing its application for an oil sands mine in Alberta. It was expected to go into production in 2026 and produce more than 250,000 barrels of oil each day, creating 7,000 jobs. The project was estimated at $20 billion and able to produce roughly 4 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions every year. Now, that's not an option because it left, but how has this affected both Wet'suwet'en members as well as the country's economic situation?
Sure. So that pipeline, the cancellation was announced, I believe, on Sunday, and the government of Canada, federal government, was due to give a decision on whether the pipeline was approved or not approved on the Monday. And the board met on a Sunday, which is very unorthodox, and they came to the conclusion and then released a letter saying that we don't want to go through the pipeline. And in a very unprecedented way, they, I believe it was a CEO or CFO, sent a letter to the Minister of the Environment, the federal government Minister of the Environment, and said the political and economic situation, I'm paraphrasing, in Canada makes it unlikely and unfavorable to further invest in the Canadian economy. But there's also a lot of weird things about it. Like they had posted financial reports the year prior that they didn't meet because of the price of oil changing, and then it was very weird. They canceled the pipeline one day before they were going to find out if they were given approval or not. So that's just strange. But I think the fact the letter is true. The political and economic situation in Canada is dissuasive towards foreign or even internal investment.
Because it would have created a lot of jobs for people in the
Exactly.
Wet'suwet'en Nation. Amara?
Well, I don't know if about. I'm not entirely sure about what you said. Because I have to be honest.
Wet'suwet'en.
Whatever.
Wet'suwet'en.
Wet'suwet'en.
There you go.
I don't know if it was that tribe, clan, whatever specifically, but it would have, I'm sure, impacted other groups.
Yeah, I think it would have created jobs, but I think just in terms of climate change, I'm definitely in favor of renewable resources. So jobs now don't necessarily help if we're destroying the climate for the future.
Jordan?
Yeah, basically just what Amara said. I also think that actually both of them, I think it's a way that sort of make it seem a lot worse than it is necessarily, in the way that they can blame almost the protests or why they aren't doing this now. But like, there's probably so many other mitigating factors. It just doesn't. The media has a inherent bias, and the way it's going to be presented is going to be presented in the way that they want it to be presented.
I just want to respond quickly to Hendrik's comment. I don't think I can see
Why
what
don't
you
you
mean.
read Hendrik's comment? Let
Sure.
everybody know what he said.
I agree completely with Samuel's first solution. Native culture is completely separate from westernized Canadian culture. I was going to skip to the bottom. The second option I was referring to integrating them is residential schools, so hard pass. I wouldn't say I'm in favor of forced integration, but I would.
But then there's also that issue of integrating them in general.
Sure.
Because they do have a very different culture.
Sure. Well, you can either give them their sovereignty. I know this is a tangent, but give them their sovereignty or absolve their special status and maybe with financial assistance allow them to, if they would like, they don't have to abandon the reserves or their townships, wherever they live, the groups they accumulate. Give them financial assistance to move to other parts of the country, open a business, find a job, whatever. People would say, oh, that's so expensive.
Do you think they want to stay on their reserves?
Well, that would be an option for them to decide. That would be a very tough political decision.
Yeah,
but
I'm not sure.
Financial incentives, it would be expensive in the short term, but I think in the long term, as we're seeing, it'd be the more politically sound and reasonable decision.
Mm-hmm. Jordan?
I think it's a good idea in theory. I think the issue behind it then becomes more like logistical issues with it. Like, I definitely understand where you are coming from with it.
Yep.
It's more so like, where would they go? Who lives there now? And would they be displaced by them moving there necessarily? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, in total, they're a minority of the population, and I'm sure not everyone would want to go to the same spot. I agree it would be very difficult, but if you're talking about a logistical, I think what we have right now is a very bad situation, a bad agreement, if you can even call it that. That is not logistical.
You mentioned previously before the show that you like the way that the U.S. handles their Native American population.
Yes.
And do you mind expanding on that?
Yeah, they are given more autonomy and sovereignty in their areas. It's not a pressing political issue in American politics because, to my knowledge, I know there's problems on the reserves, obviously, just like there are here. I mean, every single rural community in the U.S. or Canada has a certain amount of problems, especially in the U.S., I would say. But, yeah. I don't know. I think it's better than what we have now, which is chaos.
And just in general, what do you guys feel, to end off the show, is the future of the issue? Will the pipeline be built? Will the protests stop? What is going to happen?
I think the pipeline will be built. I think eventually the RCMP is going to forcibly end the blockades, and I think that the issue of Indigenous governance is going to be kicked down the road.
I think it's going to quiet down in the media cycle till the next time the Canadian government decides that they want to do something that necessarily the Indigenous government doesn't want, or the Indigenous people don't want, and we're going to end up in the exact same story. I feel like this is just going to keep repeating until some change is made.
Samuel, I know you mentioned your ideal solution, but
Yeah.
what do you think is going to happen? Is the pipeline going to be built? Are the protests going to stop?
The pipeline might not be built, but I don't think it's because the protesters are successful. I think the company involved, which is what exactly again? Do you have the
Coastal GasLink?
Coastal GasLink?
Yeah.
They might see, because I do see the protests going on into the future. I think they might withdraw. It would be too politically turbulent, and they'd be like, "Screw it, I'm out." And I think it's going to continue because I don't see any leadership from our Prime Minister.
How long do you think this is going to continue for? Do you believe, because we wanted to talk about this issue last week, but unfortunately we couldn't find a guest. Nobody wanted to speak on the subject, no matter who I reached out to, no matter how many places I called. But how long do you think this is going to take place? You know, we were hoping for coverage-wise that it would still be relevant this week. How long do you think it's going to be going on for?
Well, I think it's just actually escalated in a certain way. There's videos, like we mentioned earlier in the show, of the tracks being lit on fire. And I saw something that said they were pelting rocks at the cabin windows and the engine, the locomotive.
Yeah,
And I think just having
doors.
blockades in Toronto is really escalating it. Because
Oh,
if
now
you're going to
because
disrupt...
Now the urbanites are disrupted. Oh, now we
No,
have to
there's
pay
just
attention.
like
I know.
way more
I
people
know.
affected if you block the go coming
That's
from
right.
Hamilton into Toronto than there are in other places. I'm not saying that it's more important,
course.
but it's going to get more attention. Also, unfortunately, I don't know if other places in Canada will be offended, but Toronto is the biggest city in Canada,
Yeah.
and it is the financial center of
And
Canada.
it's affecting Montreal as well,
Yes,
because the whole corridor.
of course, but Toronto matters a lot to Canada financially and in general. There are a lot of people that work in Toronto. There are a lot of people that live in Toronto. So disrupting commuters in Toronto is going to cause a lot more of a fuss than disrupting commuters even in Montreal, even though Montreal is another major city. So as much as I don't want to, make the rest of Canada hate us even more, it's true that I think doing it in Toronto is really escalating it.
So you think it's going to escalate in the future?
More, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Because nothing's happening. I think I know in Alberta, the cops have gone in, but I don't think with the RCMP or the police in Toronto not doing anything, I think they're just going to get more and more brazen. I mean, they block the go lines at 4 p.m. That's rush hour.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I
a
know.
big deal.
But Trudeau,
It's effective.
even
I mean,
I still
it
haven't
is.
heard a moral,
I don't think
Stance.
protests have a moral stance because they're trying to make an effective statement, and the only way to do it is by inconveniencing people.
But aren't they
We all
supposed to be
agree on
fighting
that.
for something moral?
No, they're fighting for the respect of their let's be honest. There's a lot of different things that they're currently fighting for, all sort of wrapped into a pipeline protest. But I don't necessarily think that because they are asking for a certain amount of respect to them, that in their protest they need to be giving that same thing. To me, it's basically the kid you've been kicking around for all those years in the schoolyard, and then they suddenly punch you back, and it's like, whoa! I thought you were all about peace. What's
Like
with
I've
that?
said,
So the
this whole
minority
time, there
of one
needs to
tribe,
be-
the unelected minority of one tribe disagrees. Let's just ignore the sovereignty, the autonomy of all these other native groups that we'll grant. But that doesn't matter because there's 2.5% that disagrees. Oh my
enough.
God.
They're just, like I've said this whole time, there needs to be an overhaul of the governance system. It's obviously not working. It's obviously broken. And I hope everybody obviously recognizes the humanity of even the small minority of people who are protesting. And I think the solidarity protests probably have other interests, but I do think that Indigenous people have legitimate claims, and I don't think that they're just trying to be annoying. So I think, like I said, I think Canada owes it to them. Considering what's been done to the Indigenous community, they owe a genuine try at facilitating change.
And that isn't just throwing money at the
No,
problem.
it is not.
Well, that's where we're going to end the show today. Great discussion. We had a lot of comments coming in. That was our show for this week. Thank you to everyone that tuned in and again that messaged us live. We truly, truly appreciate it, as well as those that voted in our poll. A brand new episode of the Raben Report will be coming to you next week, same day, same time, same people. Have a great day, everyone.